Thank you for tuning in to the Pro Wrestling Archives. Today we will be discussing the top 10 best events of all time. I'm going to get right into it, alright? Number 10, World War III 1996 by WCW. 60 men in 3 rings, over-the-top battle royal. One of the most creative ideas for a stipulation match of all time. I don't think it gets enough credit. I wanted to mention that. Number 9 was a show I was at Madison Square Garden. SummerSlam 91. We saw the match made in heaven. We also saw Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig and Bret Hart in a grueling match for the Intercontinental title. A match that I was rooting for Kurt Hennig all day, but he was injured before the match, and he got through the match with a back injury and hurt his back more and was out for a while. But that was Bret Hart. That was the passing of the torch for Bret Hart as far as being an Intercontinental Champion. Number 8, November to Remember 1997 by ECW. There was a lot of hype in this match, in this pay-per-view, and the franchise, Shane Douglas and Bam Bam Bigelow, squared off. They were partners before, and then they became enemies, and they fought for the world title. And it was the only time that I've ever seen the franchise be a babyface, because they were in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the way that whole match was planned out or called on the fly, whatever it was one of the best matches I had ever seen. Definitely the best match I've ever seen Bam Bam Bigelow in, no doubt about it. And that's not taking away from anything from him, because I've been watching him since around 1987 Survivor Series. So 10 years after that, he puts on one of the best matches of his career, and same thing goes for the franchise. I think the franchise should get a lot of credit in this. The fans in Pittsburgh, they love wrestling. Pittsburgh's a great wrestling city. So many guys came from there. Bruno franchise, the list goes on. All right, going down the list. Number 7, ECW's first pay-per-view, Barely Legal. And I'll never forget the way that the show started with the Eliminators and the Dudley Boys. And the Eliminators were one of my favorite tag teams in the history of tag team wrestling, and to see Saturn and Cronus in there just kicking ass, calling moves on the fly and doing high spots, it's just really, really great opening match. Dudley Boys got squashed real quick. But speaking of Barely Legal, that main event match, the three-way dance into the world title match, Terry Funk, Stevie Richards, and the Sandman just tear the place down and just kick the fucking shit out of each other. And then Terry Funk gets through, and then we all know what happens there with Terry Funk and Raven going at it. Terry Funk pulls off the biggest upset, it not only in his career, but in ECW history. Terry Funk becomes the ECW World Champion in 1997. What can you really say about that? Terry Funk's over 50 years old, and he's doing more hardcore shit than anybody else on the planet. Terry Funk is a fucking legend. Going right down the list, I believe, now I don't have like a whole lot of references here in front of me, but I believe the Battle Bowl 93 was the one that got me hooked on Battle Bowl. Drawing the names out of the hat, drawing the names to see who would tag team with who. And you got the heels on one side and you got the baby faces on the other. Seeing that split locker room on TV for like one of the first times like that was really cool. And seeing fights break out backstage, and seeing different pairings of different wrestlers that would normally not tag with each other or tag against their own tag partners, that was pretty cool. And then to see the battle, that was the Lethal Lottery. Then to see the Battle Bowl after it all, I've always been a sucker for battle royals, and I just want to mention a couple people that really stood out to me. And this is what I'm saying. I'm pretty sure it was '93. But a couple guys that stood out to me: Rick Rude, Big Van Vader, Cactus Jack, Abdullah the Butcher, Dustin Rhodes. I remember all these guys. The Diamond Stud, I believe, was there. Or no, he was already over as Razor Ramon, so this might have been 92. I don't know. Going right down the list. Number 5. This is a controversial one because I think this one could be a little higher up in some people's... You got to understand, this is just my list, all right? We're going to call this Rick's list of best events of all time. Because everybody could argue any of these things, you know what I mean? Let this phone do its thing for a second. I think that'll be it right there. There you go. There you go. Number 5 on this list is one of the best WrestleManias of all time. WrestleMania 6. Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior main event. Never forget that show. It was a colossal show. Only reason I'm putting it as number 5 and not number 1 is because that Warriors run after this was not really, as hyped up as it could have been or successful as it could have been. Hogan versus Warrior. It was split right down the middle. Most of my friends liked Hogan. I liked Warrior. But we split it, as in, it could have went either way. And then because it could have went either way, I was really shocked that Warrior won. I'm as old as WrestleMania, so I was about 6 years old when this happened. And I was really shocked that the Ultimate Warrior beat Hulk Hogan in that main event, even though I was rooting for the Warrior all day. I was a huge Warrior fan as a kid. I mean, you got to understand, going to a place like the Spectrum and seeing Hogan do his thing and pose in front of everybody for 20 minutes, it got old really fast. I don't know why they let him do that for so long at all them shows, but when Warrior would come in, he'd be quick and to the point. Just get in, get out kind of thing. And that was where it was at, like we would just get that jolt of the strongest energy, Going right down the list, number 4. This was another big moment in professional wrestling history. WrestleMania 15, which was Steve Austin versus The Rock in Philadelphia. And, that was the highlight of the Attitude Era, as in that was the moment when the WWE truly gave the fans what they wanted to see. And that was almost like a Hogan Warrior as well, where it's you got two guys there that the fans both want to win, and it's split right down the middle. But that was just a huge moment. I remember VHS being at a certain level back then because DVDs were soon to come onto the scene, but the height of VHS was at that time as well, the peak. Going right down the list, number 3, Royal Rumble 1992, when Ric Flair took it down, drawing number 1, making it all the way to number 30. I would say that was one of the best events of all time. Seeing Ric Flair in the WWF at that time, WWE, tearing it up. He had brought over the WCW World Championship title, and it was just a crazy, crazy time period for pro wrestling. Number 2, the first event I ever saw on VHS on my television when I was a kid. I was 3 years old. Survivor Series 1987. That main event match when you got all them guys in there and everybody's getting all hyped up to get in there was one of the craziest things I ever saw. And I was always a one-man gang guy. I'm also an Akeem guy, but back then the gang was so tough that I wanted him to win. And he was on that team with Andre and all them guys, man. It was just one of the biggest, largest teams in the history of pro wrestling. King Kong Bundy. It was just the craziest shit ever. I think Butch Reed might have even been on that team, if I'm not mistaken. Going right down the list to number 1, best event of all time. This is Rick's list. Number 1 would have to go to WrestleMania 3 because it was the largest event at that time. You know, so gigantic that, you know, there's no other event that could even come close to that as being as successful as it was at that time period. You know, you had the Hogan Andre lead up, you know, and with DiBiase and, you know, the referees pulling the switcheroos right before with the Hebner brothers. There was a lot of hype around that show. And then, you know, of course, the show stealer that everybody still to this day talks about, Randy Savage and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. And, you know, WrestleMania 3 was the real deal. So there you had it. There you have it. Rick's list of the best events of all time in professional wrestling. Have a good night.